Welcome back. If you're just joining us, you are watching part 2 of tonight's 3-part show. We've just finished part 1, where we both did a tasting of Basil Hayden's bourbon. Ken, how would you summarize your overall review of Basil Hayden's?
I like it. It's a great, easy drinking bourbon. In fact, I'm gonna pour myself a little more as we get into this because my glass is empty. But overall, it's treating me well.
Well, we always want to drink in moderation, but it's nice to know that you could have a little bit more of Basil Hayden's, and with that lower proof, you're going to be okay.
Yep.
I would summarize it this way. I think as my taste for bourbon has matured, I find this to be a little flat. And I do notice what is, I think, more of a watered down bourbon, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But
I'd agree.
I will say it's certainly not bad. As I shared, I don't think I would order this at a bar or a restaurant. I don't want to pay for a weaker bourbon, but I certainly would not decline a glass if one was offered to me.
Oh, never. Who could do that?
No. So before we jump into tonight's episode of Sons, I want to remind everyone to like and subscribe. Click that little bell at the top of your page so you don't miss any future episodes. And be sure to leave us your questions and your comments in the comment section below. You can also email your questions to us at ask@bourbonbros.tv. And if your question doesn't suck, we might even answer it on a future show. All right, let's get into tonight's discussion of Sons of Anarchy, Season 1, Episode 3. Again, the episode is titled Funtown. Ken, this was not a fun episode.
No, most definitely not.
There were obviously fun moments, but the overall storyline of this episode is tough.
Right.
The original air date was September 17, 2008.
Wow.
I know we're only on episode 3, but I'm already looking forward to the show where I can say we've reached 2009. This episode was written by Kurt Sutter. I believe when we get into the next episode, which I believe is Patchover, that is not written by Kurt Sutter. So we start getting into guest writers next week.
I believe you're right.
Should I jump into a quick synopsis for anyone that may be living under a rock and has not seen the show yet?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right. So I've taken the widely available synopsis that would have been published in TV Guide if we were still living in 1984. And I massaged it a little bit so that we're not quite telling the entire episode. So this is a somewhat modified version, but when the 13-year-old daughter of prominent, charming businessman and landowner Elliot Oswald is raped during a visiting carnival, Oswald turns to Sam Crow for justice. Sam Crow's IRA connection arrives in Charming with a truckload of AK-47 rifles. After Wendy regains consciousness, Tara prods her to find out if Gemma was the one that supplied her with the heroin. And after Gemma convinces the daughter and mother to reveal the rapist's identity, Sam Crow hunts down the rapist, which is a carnival clown, and Clay has to take matters into his own hands.
Oh, boy.
Ken, what were your overall thoughts on the episode?
Well, it was, for me, definitely very difficult to watch. It was uncomfortable. There was a lot of good, entertaining, comedic topics and points that, were entertaining, but just the rape scene and even at the end, which we'll get into, it just makes you uncomfortable.
Yes.
For me.
Yes. And we're talking about a 13-year-old girl. We are both parents. We are both parents of daughters. Your daughter is how old?
She's 13.
Yeah. Hits a little close to home.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's a little older, but I certainly remember that age. And yeah, there's the feeling as a father is we're not following the normal law and order in this case.
Mm-mm.
Justice needs to be served.
Yeah.
And I think that's ultimately the way Elliot feels as the father as well. But it's not something that I necessarily like to spend a lot of time thinking about. I don't want to put myself in his shoes because it is my worst nightmare or close to one of my worst nightmares as a father.
So true.
But as an episode, we're 3 in, and you're starting to see. I feel Kurt Sutter in this episode's kind of deliberately playing he's slow playing the hand, but laying the groundwork to continue to draw you in, and fireworks are coming. Like this thing, you see the tension between Jax and Clay. You see what's happening with Wendy and Tara and Gemma. Like you can just sense that there's a foundation that's being laid because things are going to go off the rails later on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we also have some new characters introduced in this episode, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We have Elliot Oswald. He's his family, Karen and Tristan, the daughter who was raped in this episode.
Yeah.
They're prominent investors, real estate investors. So he was introduced, that family.
And we do see Elliot again in future episodes.
Yeah, you do. Michael McKeevy, who's the IRA gun runner.
Yep.
This is the first we see him, correct?
Correct. Yeah, we finally see kind of who they're getting their guns from.
Right. And then Agent Cohn, Josh Cohn, he's an ATF agent out of Chicago. He shows up. He's introduced in this episode as well.
Yes, and we don't really know it yet, but this is going to become a pretty prominent storyline.
Yeah.
So speaking of storylines, let's kind of break down and talk a little bit about kind of the main storylines in this episode. So our kind of A storyline with this episode's really rooted in is the rape and finding the rapist, right? Which Sam Crow's kind of in a race against the cops to find the rapist before they do. You've got Sam Crow still working to get their gun operation back up and running after the Mayans burnt down their old warehouse, right? So we get more of that storyline, which is a recurring theme. This is the episode where you get introduced to kind of a political angle between business owners in Charming and the club and what they want for Charming, because there's this real estate development deal that they're wanting to get done that Elliot's a part of. And Clay doesn't want that because he doesn't want Charming to grow. He doesn't want there to be more cops. It's basically going to make their lives and their jobs as outlaws more difficult. And so they're ultimately trying to prevent this real estate development deal. Mm-hmm. We've, as you mentioned, we have the introduction to Agent Cohn. So kind of introducing that storyline, which will be a recurring storyline. And then you've got what is an ongoing kind of storyline, which we talked about last week, which is this whole dynamic between Tara and Jax and Gemma and Wendy, right? Like basically everything that's happening at the hospital right now. We haven't really ventured outside the hospital at this point, but that's really another ongoing storyline. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's a good synopsis of the main storylines. Obviously, we'll get into some of the humor that is written in here, but it's that part is really well done. I mean, again, I like this episode. It just is really serious. Watching the last two, then getting dumped into this, it gets really serious. It gives you that feel for how brutal motorcycle club life can be.
Yeah, and when we get into kind of our picks for top moments, we'll talk about some of the comic relief that I think Kurt Sutter needed to include to make this episode not be a complete downer, but also some of the real kind of key aspects of the episode. But let's talk about just the storylines for a minute. So going back up to the A storyline, right? The rape and finding the rapist. So just to kind of set the scene here, you have fairly early in the episode, I think it's the opening scene before the credits, you have everybody kind of having fun at the carnival.
Right.
Then you find out the girl's missing. Then you see that she's been raped.
Right. Yeah.
And then the rest of the episode is really about Elliot wanting the club to help find the rapist and not rely on the cops, and them finding that rapist and bringing justice, if you will, for that rape and charming. That storyline occurred throughout the entire episode, and there were a lot of, I think, important moments for that storyline. As you think about that storyline as a whole and what kind of transpired over the course of the episode, what aspects of that storyline really stood out and were memorable for you?
Well, I think, what jumped out at me was when Elliot corners Clay and asks him for help, right? He doesn't go to the police. He's been around Charming a long time. He knows what the club is about. And he goes to Clay and asks Clay for help. He asked him to,
Yeah, not the police.
Find him. Not the police. But no, he goes to the club and asks for help. Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, right? Like a businessman. Like this guy doesn't belong to an outlaw motorcycle gang, right? He's a upstanding businessman in the city of Charming. And he doesn't go to the police.
Mm-hmm.
He's
out
to the
for
club.
revenge. He's out for revenge.
Yeah, it really shows you kind of the, at that point where you're just wanting to right a wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking to the group that is not bound by laws or procedures, and you're looking to the group that can get shit done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's Elliot in this situation. He knows that there's a sense of kind of you're making a deal with the devil, right? Because nothing's for free. But at this point, it doesn't matter. He needs to right this wrong. The thing about it that I understood, but in this situation, it still kind of rubbed me the wrong way is we don't know initially, but later on, not to let the cat out of the bag, but we find out that Clay kind of uses this as an opportunity to gain leverage over Elliot.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next, is that there's a secret agenda there that Clay isn't disclosing yet. And we'll get into that later.
Yeah, and I think for me, it was just that, like, I get that there's always a chess game happening and you're always looking for ways to create leverage and have favors. But when it comes to the rape of a 13-year-old girl, like, that's not the time and place in my mind. And I think Clay knew that, which is why he didn't let the club in on what he was doing.
Right.
So before we get into some of our favorite moments, in terms of the other storylines, anything that you wanted to make sure we covered or that was meaningful to you that you wanted to discuss before we move on?
No, let's get into our points here. Let's get into what's memorable. All
right. So we've both chosen kind of our 5 favorite moments, right? So we have a total of 10 moments that we'll go through. I'm going to let you have the first one. What's your first favorite moment of the episode?
Just a little bit of the comedy at the opening, where when Tig, Jax, and Juice, I believe they're on the roller coaster, right, at Funtown.
Oh yeah, and Bobby on the tilt-a-whirl. Yeah,
Bobby, that's
nothing
right.
better than seeing Bobby, the picture of health, riding the tilt-a-whirl at with a bunch of other full-grown men.
That's
that
right.
was fantastic.
Right.
And I love that Kurt Sutter put that in because, again, you see both sides of this hardcore outlaw biker gang. Like they're having fun. They're like big kids. And I loved it. I loved that little scene. It was very short and quick, but it made me laugh the moment I saw it.
Right. And then then it cuts over to Clay and Gemma, and Gemma wants to get some pictures in the photo booth. Remember that? And
yeah, I really liked this. It was funny, and we'll talk about that. I'm sure I know where you're going with this, but you've seen some kind of tension and some dramatic moments between Clay and Gemma, and here you get to see them as just two partners that are in love with one another, and they're being a little frisky and provocative with one another, and they're teasing one another, and we haven't really seen that before, and I love getting a glimpse into that relationship. But go on. What was your favorite moment about that dynamic?
She wants him to go in the photo booth so they can take some provocative photos.
I can barely see it.
Give me that. Hey.
And when they come out, she said something to the effect of, I can barely see it. He kind of embarrasses Clay.
Yeah, I love how he just rips the photo out of her hand and just tears it up. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, she heads back to the photo booth on her own, which, again, some innuendo there. So I just love the playfulness of that. I also loved the clown in the dunk tank. The clown is kind of going off the playbook of let me throw insults and try to get in your kitchen. What he failed to realize is that he's doing it with the Sons of Anarchy, and they're not taking those insults in good spirit.
No. So what do? Tig just walks up and pushes the lever.
Yeah, was it Tig that just walked up and pushed the lever? I can't remember who it was. One of them pushed the lever, and then the other one Tig went and like grabbed him and like shoved him under the water. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like they're ready to just beat the shit out of the guy. The guy got religion real quick and changed his tune.
What about you? What's a point you like?
So for me, the one I want to talk about is when Elliot goes and asks Clay and the club to help him find the rapist and to right this wrong.
I want you to find him. You bring him to me first. Pay anything you want.
Right. And I think, as I reflect, I think the reason he was going to Clay is because he wants this guy dead. He wants him found, and he wants him dead. The cops are not going to kill him. Mm-hmm. Clay and the club will kill him.
Right. And that's what he wants.
Yes, and you remember when, I can't remember exactly what it was that Clay said, but he's basically kind of explaining to Elliot like what it means to ask the club for help.
Oswald's been in this town a lot longer than Sam Crow. I know what you are.
To me, that was kind of the nod of, and I'm looking for you to do a specific thing that I know I can't get from the cops. Mm-hmm. And Clay turns it around and basically says, as the father, you have to be the one to do it. And I need to know you're going to do it before I agree to go find him. And Elliot agrees.
Mm-hmm.
And you know that for Elliot, like, this is a discussion you'd want to avoid at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
So it really was an emotional scene, and then again, there's even more cards to be played that we don't see yet. But I really enjoyed and I use this word a lot, but the authenticity of those emotions and what that means.
Right.
So that was mine. What's your next top moment?
Well, lighten it up a little bit. Half Sack forced to ride the mini bike.
Jax wants you to follow Hal. Keep tabs on him.
Follow him on what?
I'm so glad you've chosen this, because being someone that grew up riding dirt bikes, I loved that scene and the dynamic of a prospect that has no say. He just has to do what he's told, and seeing this, he's young, but he's a full grown man riding a pit bike.
Yeah.
Around
So
Charming.
Right. So Clay, the club, was it Clay, asked him to follow Hale.
Yeah, they wanted them to follow the cops to make sure that they knew what the cops knew and how close they were getting to finding the rapist as they tried to find the rapist on their own. Mm-hmm. And apparently, Half-Sack doesn't have a Harley.
It doesn't. So they point over to the mini bike, and he has to ride that. One of the scenes, I don't know if you caught it, but they're sitting there watching, and he asks if he could, was it Tig and Chibs, to get on the same bike so he could ride.
Chibs.
It was Jackson Chibs.
Yeah, when they went to where the carnival was,
Mm-hmm.
right, and Half-Sack's already there because he's watching Hale, and Jackson Chibs come up, and they chat. And then, Half-Sack says,
Think you guys could double up? Let me take one of your bikes?
Not unless he grows tits.
Big tits. Huge tits.
my other favorite moment regarding that scene was when they were at the hospital and they were talking to Darby.
Yeah.
And then I think Hale pulls up, and then you see Half-Sack come in behind him, and Clay looks at him and says,
"Do I even ask?"
No, you don't. No.
That was good. So I thought that was funny. What about you? What's your next point? Topic of interest.
Well, speaking of Tig, right? Both of our favorite characters in this show is Tig. So the cops are there to question all of the Sons of Anarchy around what's happened, right, with the rape. And they're wanting to leave to go try to find the rapist, but the cops are basically sitting there until they interview everyone. And so they decide they need a diversion. And Tig comes up with the brilliant idea of drugging the cops. And so I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he takes some form of a pill and dissolves it in the coffee. And as the cops come in for refills, he generously all tops them off, right? And 5 seconds, like they take one drink and like they're out. Like I thought he'd killed them. It was so fast. A great little comedic relief from what is a very heavy episode. Mm-hmm. How about you? What's next on your list?
Well, just from there, Juice comes back, and he was given the task of reloading the weapons. Do you remember that?
Yeah, so we've not really talked about it yet, but they one of the storylines was getting the AKs from the IRA, and so they asked Jax to basically load these weapons and get them ready.
Right.
And so that was their task. And then I believe, if I know where you're going, Tig gave Juice something.
Right. He gave them what was left over of the sedative that he made the coffee with.
Hey, put these in my box.
What are they? What are they?
They're vitamins. Vitamins.
And he ends up passed out on the ground, and he does of the club, and he doesn't get around to reloading the weapons, which comes into
and
play
real
later.
quickly, just to go back, so Tig hands him the bag with the pills in it, and Juice is like, "What is this?" Right? Because to your point, like, he thinks it's something good, and Tig, and this is where Tig
That's right.
took a misstep. He went, "Vitamins. They're vitamins," and doesn't actually tell Juice what they are. And so you see Juice, and we've just seen what happened with the cops, and you see Juice take one out and kind of, and then pops the pill, and you immediately know this is not good. And then, yes, as you described, later on, it cuts back and you see Juice just out like a rabid dog, foaming at the mouth. He is
Out
on the
cold.
ground, out cold.
Yep.
Great scene. All right, so that's going to do it for part 2. We're out of time. Please remember to like and subscribe. Please check out our channel for more episodes. And most importantly, be sure to join us for part 3, where we will continue enjoying some of Basil Hayden's and wrap up our discussion of Sons of Anarchy, Season 1, Episode 3, titled Funtown. Stay with us.